The dusk lay heavy on the little frontier town, the kind that wrapped its streets in a copper glow before the lamps were ever lit. Dust clung to boots and skirts alike, and even the wind seemed to hush as if holding its breath for some secret not yet spoken. Among the townsfolk moving briskly with errands and gossip, there walked a woman who drew more stares than words, though the whispers followed her like shadows. Clara May Hollister kept her head bowed, her steps deliberate, and her face hidden beneath a heavy veil of coarse black cloth. It hung low, brushing the curve of her shoulders, concealing what the town had long decided to call the curse beneath. Children laughed behind her back, mothers pulled their little ones aside, and men tipped their hats with a sneer that carried no respect. Clara's breath came shallow beneath the veil. The fabric grew warm with every exhale, a damp prison that muffled her voice and clouded her vision. It was not vanity that bound her beneath the cloth, but the bitter memory of fire and ash, the scar that rumor had twisted into legend. The veil had become both shield and chain, protecting her from their looks even as it suffocated her. Every step through the marketplace was a gauntlet. She clutched her basket tighter, not daring to pause. Her heart beat in rhythm with the whispers, "Ghost bride, cursed girl, poor wretch." The general store door swung open as she approached, and two boys darted past, one shouting, "Don't let the ghost touch you, or you'll catch it." Their laughter trailed behind like arrows, sharp and childish but cruel all the same. Clara pressed forward, shoulders hunched, every instinct begging her to run, yet her pride forced her to keep walking. Inside, she kept her eyes on the shelves, her hands trembling as she picked out flour and beans. She heard a woman's voice behind her mutter, "Shame she doesn't leave town altogether. Some things ought to stay hidden." A rough spit hit the floor near her boots. Clara froze, willing her breath to stay even, though the cloth clung tighter to her lips with each gasp. When at last she escaped the store, she made her way toward the outskirts where the old abandoned church leaned into the sky like a weary sentinel. There, among broken pews and dust motes swirling in the shafts of fading light, she allowed herself a sliver of freedom. She lifted the veil just enough to breathe, her lungs filling with the musty air of the forgotten sanctuary. Kneeling at the cracked altar, she whispered words not meant for any ear but heaven's. "Lord, if you see me, don't let me vanish. Not yet." That same evening, another pair of eyes had been watching. Jonah Rourke, a rancher known for his silence as much as for the steadiness of his work-worn hands, had seen her pass through town more than once. He had heard the whispers, the cruel names, but where others looked with ridicule or suspicion, Jonah had felt something else stir in him. Perhaps it was because he, too, knew what it was to walk through life with weight pressing down. The land had taken much from him, parents to fever, a brother to the war, a wife to childbirth. He had learned to carry grief quietly, the way one carries a stone in the pocket, unseen but never absent. On that day, standing near the blacksmith's, Jonah's gaze followed Clara as she emerged from the store. He saw the stumble in her step, the way her hand darted beneath the veil as though clawing for air. She stopped in the street, one hand pressed to her chest, the other tugging at the suffocating fabric. Her whisper barely reached him, but he heard it nonetheless, fragile as a moth's wing, "I can't breathe." Before she could collapse, Jonah crossed the street, steadying her with one hand on her arm. His touch was gentle, yet firm enough to anchor her in that moment of panic. Clara startled, trying to pull away, but Jonah only offered his canteen. "Here," he said softly, his voice like gravel worn smooth by time. She hesitated, then took it with a shaking hand, sipping through the cloth as best she could. He did not pry. He did not ask to see her face. His eyes searched hers through the faint outline behind the veil, and what he saw there was not madness or curse, but a woman drowning in silence. She handed the canteen back, offering no words, only a small nod before hurrying away. Jonah stood in the street a moment longer, the town's curious glances bouncing off his back. He felt a stirring inside him he hadn't known in years, not pity, but a quiet recognition. There was a storm inside that woman, one he understood in ways he could not yet name. In the days that followed, Jonah kept noticing her. At the well at dawn, at the church steps at dusk, walking through town with her basket clutched to her chest. Always the veil. Always the silence. He never approached again, yet his eyes sought her out as naturally as one looks for the horizon. He heard the mocking voices of other men. "Jonah's got an eye for the ghost bride." Their laughter was meant to shame him, but Jonah bore it the way he bore everything, quietly, unmoved. Some burdens were worth carrying. Then came the storm. A night when the sky split with thunder and the rain fell like nails upon the earth. Clara was caught in the open as the wind tore at her veil, soaking it until it clung heavy against her mouth. She stumbled in the mud, her hands clawing at the fabric, gasping, the words breaking from her throat again. "I can't breathe." Jonah, riding home from town, saw her fall to her knees in the mire, her body shaking with panic. He leapt from his horse, rushing to her side, kneeling in the mud without hesitation. His hands were rough with labor, yet careful as he gripped her shoulders, lifting her chin toward the storm-dark sky. Her eyes met his through the sodden cloth, wild with fear and desperation. Jonah's heart clenched as though it were his own breath being stolen. The rain lashed down, thunder roaring above, but in that moment the world seemed to narrow to the space between his hand and her veil. "Clara," he whispered, her name trembling from his lips for the first time. "You don't have to carry this alone." Her voice cracked, raw and pleading. "I can't breathe." And before he could stop himself, Jonah's hands moved. He lifted the veil from her face, the cloth heavy with rain sliding away. His heart froze in his chest, stopped not by horror but by the staggering truth revealed beneath. The storm paused in its fury, as though the heavens themselves leaned close to see. And Jonah, kneeling in the mud with the veil slipping from his fingers, could not look away. The veil slipped from Jonah's fingers and collapsed into the mud, its dark weight no longer clinging to Clara's face. For the first time since she had come to this town, the truth of her features stood unveiled before another's eyes. A scar, long and pale, ran from her temple down across her cheek to her jawline, a cruel reminder of fire's hunger, carved into skin too young to have carried such a wound. Yet that scar did not erase the humanity in her gaze. Her eyes, wide and rain-soaked, glimmered with a fierce vulnerability, a soul still burning despite the ashes it had been dragged through. Clara braced herself for recoil, for the disgust she had seen a dozen times in half-glimpses, for the moment a man would step back as if her face carried a plague. But Jonah did not flinch. His heart had indeed stopped, though not from revulsion. It was the sheer force of her courage that left him stunned. The rain lashed harder, streaking across her revealed skin, yet Jonah lifted his weather-beaten hat and placed it gently above her head, sheltering her as though she were something sacred. His silence spoke more than any hurried reassurance. His gaze did not shy away from the scar. He saw it, but he also saw the trembling lips, the woman fighting for breath, the life still refusing to be extinguished. Clara's tears mixed with the storm, and for the first time in years, she did not reach to cover herself again. The veil lay abandoned, a rag in the dirt. Jonah helped her rise, steadying her as though she were the only fragile thing in the world that mattered. They walked back toward town through the storm, her steps unsteady yet strangely lighter without the cloth that had been her prison. The lamps of the street flickered as curious eyes peered from windows, shocked at what they witnessed. Clara May Hollister with her face uncovered, walking beside Jonah Rourke as though no shame clung to her. The murmurs began instantly, their disbelief carried through the rain. Some laughed, others gasped, but Jonah's stride did not falter. His hand hovered near her elbow, not gripping, simply near enough to steady her if she wavered. With each step, Clara felt something stir within her, a loosening of the years she had spent hidden. The shame that had pressed upon her spine like a stone began to shift, piece by piece, into something lighter. The following day, whispers grew into open stares. At the bakery, Clara entered without her veil. The room fell silent. A man at a table snickered. A woman muttered, "She should have kept herself covered." Clara's cheeks burned, yet she stood taller than she had ever dared. Jonah entered behind her, tipping his hat, his presence quiet but immovable. He did not speak for her, nor did he shield her with words. His very nearness lent her a kind of unspoken armor, as if his steadiness poured into her bones. When she met her reflection in the bakery's dusty glass, she startled, not at the scar, but at her own upright posture. She was visible, and though the eyes upon her burned, she had not vanished. That evening, the gossip reached its cruelest height in the saloon. Men who thrived on mockery raised their voices as Clara passed outside with Jonah. "Show us the ghost's face," one shouted, emboldened by liquor. Let's see what the rancher's hiding under his wing." Laughter erupted, crude and cutting. Jonah's jaw clenched as he turned to shield her, but before he could speak, Clara stepped forward into the open doorway. Her heart pounded, her body shook, but her voice found strength in the cracks. "This scar," she began, her words trembling yet clear, "is not death. It is proof I lived through fire that stole everything I had. I survived what would have buried many of you." She swept her gaze across the room, meeting eyes that had never met hers before. "I will not hide for your comfort any longer." The saloon hushed, the jeers swallowed by her raw defiance. The men shifted uncomfortably, some looking away, others glancing down at their boots. Jonah stood a step behind her, pride swelling in his chest, knowing that it was not his hand that had torn away her chains, it was her own courage. Clara turned and walked out with her chin lifted, the silence she left behind louder than any insult could have been. Days bled into weeks, and though whispers did not vanish, they lost their venom. Some townsfolk still avoided her, but others began to soften. A child tugged at her sleeve at the well, asking if the mark hurt, and when Clara shook her head with a small smile, the child grinned back without fear. That single moment stitched something whole in her heart. She began to live without the veil, to walk openly, to let the scar exist without apology. Jonah remained near, never pressing, never demanding. His kindness was shown in quiet acts, splitting wood and leaving it stacked by her door, offering the first share of his harvest, mending the fence near her small home without asking. His affection grew not in declarations but in the constancy of his presence. Clara, who had known only stares and cruelty, found herself learning trust in the spaces between his words, in the silence that was never heavy but always steady. One evening, under a sky strewn with stars, they sat together on the steps of the abandoned church where she had once hidden her prayers. The night was still, the air filled only with the sound of crickets and the far-off murmur of cattle. Clara's scar caught the moonlight, no longer a brand of shame but a silver thread across her skin. Jonah broke the silence, his voice low. "The world lied about you," he said. "They saw only what fear told them to see. But I see the truth." Clara turned toward him, her eyes glistening. A smile trembled at her lips, not the practiced mask she once wore to survive, but a true smile, fragile and luminous. Tears slid down her cheeks, yet she did not hide them. For the first time since the fire, she felt wholly visible, wholly alive, and strangely at peace. And so, to you who listen to this tale, remember, scars do not end beauty, nor do they erase worth. They are the handwriting of survival, etched upon the body by storms endured. All they await is someone gentle enough, patient enough, to read them for what they are, not disfigurement, but proof of resilience. And sometimes, when the veil falls away and the truth is seen, a heart that has stopped cold will beat again, not in horror, but in wonder.